Construction Week's second episode of our webinar series, The Hard Hat Chat, which discusses today's most current and engaging topics from the Middle East built environment. My name is Ashley Williams. I'm the editor of Construction Week Middle East, and I'm joined by two very exciting guests in Fischer Middle East and Africa's Regional Manager for Firestop, Muzaffar Ahmed Syed, and Underwriters Laboratories Senior Project Engineer, Jonathan J. Gonzalez. Now today, we're going to be talking about how fire stopping is a crucial part of a building's fire prevention measures, and to discuss how we can improve health and safety measures through the use of suitable applications and MEP services. So Muzaffar and Jonathan, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you both here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we begin our webinar, I'd like our viewers to understand a bit about our panelist's background in Firestop. So Muzaffar is regarded as a Firestop specialist and has more than 10 years experience within this field. Muzaffar is going to be going into detail today about a range of topics, such as codes and standards that define fire stopping in MEP, different types of testing methods, certifications that are required for fire stopping, and various solutions of fire stopping for MEP services. While Jonathan's experience started as a product safety engineer in fire protection for building materials and systems at Underwriters Laboratories global headquarters in Northbrook, Chicago in the USA, and has been in the industry since. He's been involved in numerous certification projects while working with local and international building and certification standards and codes. He has spent the last 8 years with Underwriters Laboratories, with 5 of those years in the Middle East region at their regional headquarters in Dubai. So without further ado, let's kick things off. So gentlemen, recent fires in high-rise buildings across the Middle East, including the likes of Sharjah here in the UAE, have rightly put fire safety at the top of the agenda for building projects. Now, I came across a recent statistic from NFU Mutual, and for those who don't know who they are a property insurance firm who claimed that there has been a 46% rise in the number of commercial property fire claims during the lockdown period. So from what I understand, that's from the 1st of March to around the end of July, and in comparison to the same period last year. So this is obviously causing some concern that people are putting fire and safety measures to one side. So Muzaffar, I want to start with you. With obviously these quite concerning statistics, where do you think the most suitable Firestop application is required within a building?
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Ashley, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today as part of this discussion. Now, fire life safety protection is a crucial part of the built environment, as you said. Fire protection approach needs to be a balanced approach consisting of active as well as passive systems. Now, active systems, as the name suggests, gets activated once there is an action like a fire happening or a smoke detection. So you have the detection systems and suppression systems as part of the active systems. However, the active systems do have some shortcomings. For example, they need power to activate, which might have been cut off or failed somehow. Or sometimes the active systems were intentionally turned off for some reason or the other. Furthermore, the active systems work only during the initial phase of a fire incident. Once the fire has reached a particular strength, the active systems fail to be useful. Hence, to address these shortcomings, passive fire protection is also needed within a building. The concept behind the passive fire protection approach is simple. The building is to be divided into well-defined zones or compartments by use of what we call as fire separating elements. such that in case there is a fire in one such compartment, the passive systems ensure that the fire is contained within the compartment of origin for a given length of time. The size of the compartment, location of the fire separating elements, duration of the time for the fire should be contained are parameters that are designed based on guidelines available in several international codes like IBC or local fire safety codes like the UAE Fire Life Safety Code. Now, these fire separating elements, like the fire rated walls or floors, need to be constructed without any opening to achieve the required fire resistance rating when tested to several standards, for example, the ASTM E119. That would essentially mean that each compartment is completely isolated from each other. But this is not a viable scenario in real projects. There would be several MEP services penetrating these fire separating elements, which would require an opening within these fire separating elements, thereby compromising the resistance rating of the element itself. This is where Firestop comes to the rescue. Firestop systems provide a means to reinstate the required resistance rating of a compromised fire barrier, and hence the most suitable location for fire stopping would be within the fire barriers that were compromised due to MEP penetrations in a building. Hope that I answered your question.
Yes, yeah, it was very clear actually. So Jonathan, sort of same question to you. Well, I just want to get your thoughts about some of the statistics that I mentioned earlier, and I want to kind of go into, what's the thought process with UL when picking out the most suitable Firestop applications for buildings?
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for having me today. In regards to the most suitable location, I don't think we would necessarily say any one location is more suitable than the other. I think it is really important, as Mustafa mentioned, is that we recognize that the local requirements, such as the Building and Life Safety Code, really dictate where and how the fire stop should be installed. It is also important that we understand why fire stopping is important. Obviously, for example, to protect loss of property and loss of life. In the code in the UAE, it really focuses on high risk occupancies such as hospitals, schools, and warehouses. So in my opinion, when we say where is the most suitable location, we would fall back on the UAE code requirements, which clearly outline when and how the fire stop systems are to be used in a particular building and location.
Okay. And Jonathan, Muzaffar touched upon, just with his response, about the role of passive and active fire systems. So could you explain to our viewers in a bit more detail about passive and active fire systems for MEP in buildings, and what are the benefits for these systems, and how do you implement them at UL?
Sure. So we believe that both roles are very important to protect life and property. We believe that a balance of both passive and active fire protection is required to meet safety in the building and also meet the requirements outlined in the code to achieve proper fire protection. Now, it's really important we understand the difference between active and passive fire protection, which Mustafa had mentioned in the previous question. So the active side, when we look at it, it's a more dynamic system, something that requires some kind of movement, such as a sprinkler or smoke detection or smoke alarm. So it requires multiple items moving at the same part for it to work. Unlike a passive system, where it's more of a static fire protection system, such as the Firestops, which we're discussing today, don't require any outside resources for it to work or activate to protect that building or fire protection barrier. In the codes, you'll find either both or one or the other. But again, as I mentioned before, a balance of both we feel are the best balance to have the proper fire protection. And unlike the active fire protection, the passive fire protection doesn't, as I mentioned before, doesn't rely on anything else for it to activate during a fire scenario.
Okay. And Muzaffar, would you agree with some of those statements that Jonathan said? And do you have any other benefits that you could tell us about for the difference in active fire systems?
Yes, actually. And adding on to Jonathan's answer, as aptly he has pointed out, and as I discussed earlier, the active systems would be responsible for the detection and suppression of the fire in its initial stages, right? However, as I told before, that these are prone to failures for several reasons, be it due to the human intervention or failure of the systems itself. The passive systems, on the other hand, are meant to add a layer of protection by providing a means of limiting the spread of fire through the building. Now, the
Yeah.
benefits that you get by adding this layer is multifold. And some of them are, for example, occupants would get enough time to escape the premises, which help in reducing the loss of life. Since the fire is limited to only one part of the building, this results in reducing the loss of property as well. Enough time is available for rescue and firefighting crews to arrive and take control of the situation. And finally, the building is code compliant, hence limiting potentially a huge liability on the building owners and maintainers. So this is what I would like to sum up in the benefits of active versus passive fire protection systems.
Okay, and as you're both aware, testing is obviously essential when dealing with fire safety. As you kind of just said, Muzaffar, as without the proper checks, it can result in the loss of life. So, Jonathan, I just want to start with you on my next question. So, what testing methods do you adopt at Underwriters Laboratories in particular for Firestop systems? Are you able to explain to our viewers a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ashley. So, as you know, UL really focuses on testing and certification. So there's various standards and test methods that we look at when looking at the performance of fire stopping. But again, as I mentioned before, we would have to go back to what is required locally or in your local code requirements. So in the UAE, for example, we look at NFPA 251, ACME 814, UL 1479, UL 2079, FM 4990, EN 1366 Part 3, which are some standards that are outlined in the code requirements here locally. Besides the testing portion of this, it's important that we also focus on certification. So after a product is tested and it complies to a specific safety standard, we want to ensure that that product that is tested is installed in the correct fashion, in the correct manner on the site, any job site you may come across. So again, besides the testing portion, which there are various standards, I mentioned a few that were outlined in the code, we want to ensure that the installation and the certification of those products meet the requirements, again, dictated in the code and local regulation.
Okay. And Muzaffar, same question to you. What do you look for when testing kind of methods for Firestop? What is there any differences that you take compared to UL, for example?
Yeah, actually, we as manufacturers, we have to follow the standards that are already set for testing of these products and systems. Now, several standards outline the requirement, procedure, etc. for Firestop testing. Also, apart from these standards, there are local authorities having jurisdiction, which in terms of Firestop we call as AHJs, define the testing standards that are acceptable to them. And as rightly said by Jonathan, the UA Fire Life Safety Code calls for EN 1366 Part 3, UL 1479, ASTM E814, and FM 4990 for penetration fire stopping. Apart from testing, we also have to follow an essential step, that is to get the certification from certification bodies like UL. So we do the test and we go ahead and get it certified. Again, the UA Fire Life Safety Code gives a list of about 35 acceptable certification bodies, right? So in Fisher, we have tested Firestop systems complying with both the test standards, ASTM as well as EN test standards, and certified by several certification bodies. We also conduct regular internal tests following the guidelines set out in these standards as part of our research and development. As you know, the technologies are keep developing, and we need to have cutting edge solutions to remain suitable as well as viable options in the Firestop world, basically.
Okay. I want to turn the next part of the webinar sort of the MEP side to Firestop system. So it'd be interesting to find out how do you both identify which MEP services are suitable for certain buildings. Muzaffar, would you be able to start this off? How do you determine which MEP application is suitable for a particular project that you're working on?
Yes, actually, in this part of the world, we see several services that are being used in any given project. So we have come across the insulated and non-insulated ducts. Then we have the chill water piping as part of the mechanical or HVAC systems. As part of the plumbing services, we come across the supply pipes manufactured from polypropylene or polyethylene material, oftenly called as PPR or HDPE pipes. Then there are the famous PVC or polyvinyl chloride pipes that are oftenly used in drainage and rainwater ventilation systems. The electrical systems have the cable tray, cables, trunking, and bus bars in them. And how can I forget the firefighting system, which uses steel pipes to feed the sprinkler systems? Now, that would briefly cover all the services that are usually available in a given project. Now, in terms of fire safety, it is essential to note that more than the nature of services or the use of the services itself, the material of the penetrant impacts the behavior of a given Firestop system. So always you would see the mention of the type of penetrant rather than the use of penetrant in the listed Firestop systems, right? So we have the listed system. We always mention whether it is a metallic pipe, and this metallic pipe could be used for either mechanical or plumbing services. It doesn't matter. So that is what is more important, right?
Okay, and Jonathan, again, what sort of services do you look for when working for Underwriters Laboratories? Do you do the same things as what Muzaffar just said? Look at things like steel pipes. Do you go down the same process as them? It'd be good to understand if you're on the same page as Fischer, or do you work differently?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So correct. I mean, as Mustafa just mentioned, there's various and limitless amount of penetrants types that penetrate a wall or floor for plumbing or fire protection, HVAC. So that being said, as you can tell, is a lot of variations and a lot of options when it comes to through penetrations in a wall or floor assembly. That being said, as I mentioned before, we would rely solely on what's described or outlined in the code requirements. But from our perspective on things in regards to the penetrants that you heard previously, is you can tell how complex it can get with the various penetrant types, the type of substrate, the thickness of a substrate, the style of fire-stopping material you're going to use, the hourly rating. So the combination is endless. So as you can probably imagine, there's just hundreds and hundreds of systems that get published yearly to address different combinations and use systems for these fire stops.
Okay, and I want to go into the engineering side to fire stopping. So Muzaffar, you're obviously very experienced at Fischer Middle East and Africa. You spent 10 years, well, more than 10 years actually, with them. You might be best placed to answer my next question. So why do you think engineering judgments are required for fire stopping, and what makes it essential?
Excellent and a burning question, Ashley, actually. So if you recall my earlier answers, I have always referred to Firestop as a system, not a product. So many a times we get a question or inquiry asking if Fischer FIAM, for example, is rated for 4 hours. So there is no rating given to a single product when Firestop is being tested. The rating would always be given to a system that is tested as a whole. Now, if we talk about system, there are parameters. So the system parameters would include the substrate that the penetration is passing through, the penetrant type and material, the insulation type and the thickness, the opening size and the annular gap, and lastly, the backing material and the Firestop sealant. Now, these parameters would be clearly defined in the listed systems. Ideally, the actual site conditions should exactly match with the given parameters mentioned in the system. However, we are living in a real world, and unfortunately, Firestop is one of those items that are taken up in the later stages of the project. Hence, we find many a times one or more of these parameters do not match with the existing listed systems. Now, this reality is also acknowledged by the international and local building codes, and hence there is the requirement for engineering judgments. Now, the manufacturer issues engineering judgments under the guidelines set out by bodies like the International Firestop Council with certain conditions. Now, EJs should be for a specific project and for a particular application only. EJs cannot be issued in lieu of the available listed systems and should always have one or more reference systems from which it is interpolated. Many a times, unfortunately, sometimes we come across people who have misused the EJs to either save money or save cost. Generally, the EJs would either be similar cost or higher cost than the listed system. So that is the answer to your question, actually.
Okay. And Zafar, are you able to provide any details or examples of MEP services that you provide for certain building projects in the Middle East? Are you able to talk about some of the projects that you've worked on in particular? I think our viewers would be quite interested in hearing from you on this.
Yes, so we as Fisher ensure that we have a product range and listed system tests to address the most common requirement for MEP fire stopping within a given project. We have a solution for all types of services, be it the metallic pipes or the combustible like PVC pipes with a cutting edge solution with just a sealant for up to 125 dia PVC pipe, or the HVAC ducts or the electrical services. We have provided Firestop solutions in several significant projects like the Jalila Hospital or the residential towers like the Bays by Danube in UAE. Our solutions were also used in mall projects like the Mall of Oman or the tourism projects like Oman Convention and Exhibition Center in Oman. And we have several projects where, for example, we talk about stadiums, and Fisher Firestop is being used in the iconic stadiums like Al Bayt or Rayyan Stadium in Qatar. Apart from these, we have provided solutions to numerous projects around the GCC region and also in several countries around the world.
Okay, yeah, really interesting to hear that. Jonathan, are you kind of on the same scale with UL in terms of those projects? Are you able to elaborate and give detail about some of the projects that you've used like MEP services for?
Sure, and thank you. And I think Mustafa put it well here by saying it's not only testing the product. There's always a system involved. So besides certifying the actual product, let's say a Firestop sealant, there is an end use, the system, which really dictates the type of penetrant, the amount of material used, any special conditions they may have, and that is intended to be used by the end user. So if it's authority having jurisdiction, a civil defense member, inspection agencies, the system really dictate what it's used for and how it's installed. So that's really important, what Mustafa had mentioned earlier. But in regards to how UL is involved with MP services in projects in the field, as you know, UL is traditionally in the fire and testing testing and certification field. But besides our traditional testing certification, UL does perform inspections for fire stops and joints and many other various components of the building, such as fire-rated doors, fire-rated dampers, security of a building, active and passive fire protection inspection. UL also provides system and building commissioning. So we're not really in the field installing Firestop products like Mustafa may work with, but we were there to ensure that they're installed correctly as per the certified system. So one personal certification program, which was developed by UL, is a UL qualified Firestop contractor program. Okay, so this program was created by UL, which UL proctors, and accesses individuals or a company to install and test them, and test the individual to ensure that they install and inspect the Firestop system per the UL certification. So besides the training opportunities they have, there's actually an examination where they get qualified to inspect the Firestop systems in the field and understand how the Firestop systems are published within the UL directory to make sure that the finished product matches what's on the published system, the certified published system.
Okay. And with such a highly important area of the industry, and one that I can imagine is quite highly pressured due to the repercussions that it could have, obviously, if your services do go wrong. Jonathan, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the challenges that you've experienced during your time at UL for Firestop systems, and what have you done to overcome those obstacles?
Sure, and that's a great question. As I mentioned, we're not in the manufacturing field, so we really focus on the certification part. So we want to ensure, I guess the biggest challenge would be that the products get installed in the fashion that they were tested and certified to. So I think that would be one of the biggest challenges we see. So what UL has done, like many certification bodies, is create a online certification directory which outlines all the systems all the details within a Firestop system on ul.com. Our search engine is called Product IQ, for example, for UL. It's a very robust search engine for Firestops. You can call it a Google for UL, for example, where you can search different parameters of Firestop systems, and it's a free search engine, and it's intended for the end users and stakeholders in the built environment. Within that search engine, you're able to search the type of penetrant, the type of substrate, maybe the hourly rating. As Mustafa mentioned, the annular space, maybe you're limited to a specific opening size. So this allows our users to do a quick search to find the correct system. As I mentioned before, there are hundreds and thousands of systems published. So in order for us to narrow down what we need in a specific project, UL has developed this very robust search engine called Product IQ, where customers and end users in the built environment can find the specific system needed. And as you know, there's a limited amount of combinations that can happen for that published system. And as we continue to learn more about how Firestops are used, and things change as we learn more about fire stopping. Today we talked a lot about the fire protection, but for fire stopping, there's also, besides the fire protection, which is we call it F rating, there's also the T rating for temperature, which measures the unexposed temperature of the system. We have the leakage, which is the L rating for air and smoke. The water leakage, a W rating, which addresses any kind of water penetration to a fire stop. And most recently, a standard is published to address the movement of fire stops. So when vibration in the building occurs, is a new standard published by ASTM E3037, which addresses the movement in the fire stop. So you can tell there's many different factors in regards to the installation of a fire stop, and also understanding the safety concerns you may have, not just from fire, but maybe other safety hazards that fire stop may see throughout its lifetime.
And Mustafa, you've been in this field for over a decade. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced, or some of the challenges that stood out for you during that time?
Yes, actually, you have told a decade, and you make me feel old. I'm not that old, also. So that's great.
No, you're not.
Right. So for us now, Jonathan has done a very good discussion on the technical side of the testing and all of that. That is some of the challenges that is faced. And what I would talk about is more of the challenges that we face in the field. So for us, the main challenges we faced are the lack of knowledge, awareness, and understanding of the requirement of Firestop as part of the fire life safety strategy in a building. Now, sometimes people feel that if it is not visible, it is not important, right? So if you have people spending millions on finishes, but the moment you talk about fire safety, they are hesitant to invest in it, even though it just costs a fraction of the cost spent on other elements of the building. Now, we as Fisher consider sharing our technical knowledge as very important and invest heavily in conducting seminars, webinars, customer trainings, and awareness programs about this aspect of fire life safety. Also, I commend the Construction Week for conducting such events and thereby increasing the awareness among the subscribers. We also have faced challenges when customers have asked us to provide solutions for non-compliant penetrants. Like, for example, recently you come across a lot of use of something called as a pre-insulated duct. So this is basically a duct formed from an insulating material without a metallic sheet element within it. So you cannot provide a solution for that until and unless you use a kind of a damper for it, right? So they have asked to provide a solution or an EJ. And similarly, they have asked us for a solution where the pipe was insulated with a very dangerous material which reacts very fast under a fire called polystyrene, or the normal thermocol insulation that you see. So if you expose that to fire, it would just vanish or burn away immediately. So you don't have enough time for any kind of Firestop material to expand and close that gap. So we have been asked for these kind of solutions, but since it is life safety, we deal with many a time we had to turn down such requests. And with a blink of eye, when it comes to business versus life safety, we always choose life safety first, right? In short, challenges are present. However, slowly we see a rising awareness among all the stakeholders, and that's a positive sign towards the understanding of fire stopping as a requirement.
I think you're absolutely spot on there, Muzaffar. I think personally for me, it took me quite a while to understand the concept of Firestop systems. And do you think that's kind of the grey area, that people just don't understand what Firestop system is, and it's kind of how important it is for the kind of the build of buildings? Is that do you think that's kind of the main area?
Yes, that's one of the areas where people do not understand the importance. So they think that, okay, I have built a fire rated wall, right? And I have a pipe passing through. Let me just fill it up with any foam. It should prevent the fire. Basically, there is no tested system for a foam, polyurethane based foam, to actually behave as expected in a MEP application. So polyurethane based foam has testings to civil joints, but not for MEP. Even though we are trying to develop a product similar to that, which would be useful, but as Jonathan aptly said, that there is also movement requirement. So foam is a very static element, so it just stays there. So these kind of things, and especially awareness and knowledge. So if you consider any fire training or fire institutes, their focus would be heavily on the active systems and not on the passive system. So they would talk very briefly on passive system, that okay, we have intumescent paint for the steel buildings, we have some kind of a fire curtain, that's all. But when we talk about these very small but which play a major role in a fire event, it is absent, right? So this is the reason why many a times you don't have that attitude from the people itself. So if they know, for example, I know that this building requires 4 columns for it to stand, so I will invest in it. But I wouldn't know that there might be a fire, there might not be a fire, even though it is a real threat, right? You can see how many fires have happened recently, and the statistic that you noted in the beginning of this conversation was very spot on. And we have been reading about fire incidents every time. So it's, since the attitude of human beings is that it didn't happen with me, so it would not happen with me. This is not correct.
Yeah.
Right. So that being said, the importance of Firestop is a place when you think of projects where you want, or buildings where you want, that the moment there is a fire, if it is prevented or if it is contained, the next day you need to have production again. So for big factories, like how Jonathan was talking about occupancies. So if you have a big factory, right? So if this was pioneered by the Chrysler factory, where they talked about compartmentation and all this. So they had a fire incident where they were able to contain the fire in one zone, and the next day they were able to continue production. And if you see the statistics from NFPA or other agencies, they have becomes very clear that if there is a fire incident in a a business building, it takes very large amount of money to restart that business. And many a times you see that within a year or two, the business has failed just because of this fire incident. So the threat is very real. The protection is very easy and also cost effective. It's just a matter of understanding and the knowledge sharing, and we are very happy to do that. So that is what I would like to add on.
Yeah, really interesting insight there, Muzaffar. And for my final question, I want to find out what makes Fisher, Middle East and Africa and Underwriters Laboratories stand out as specialists in this aspect of the construction industry. Jonathan, could you start off first and just tell us, a little bit about the companies and what makes you a specialist?
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. So, just to summarize our discussion today, we talked about on behalf of UO was certification, which is important and required in the local requirements. We talked about testing to various different standards, inspection, installation, having the qualified inspectors program by UL, for example. We talked about the search engine for finding the correct systems for the correct use. And that comes from over 125 years of experience of UL in the industry, in the fire protection industry. With that 125 years comes global expertise. Right? You can find offices all around the world, so we understand what the requirements may be in Asia or in Europe and Middle East, the Americas. All the requirements and codes, although adopted in some regions, may be different. So having that expertise globally, having the experience in fire testing and certification, we're then able to have a very strong brand recognition of UL. So the UL mark holds a lot of value in different countries and different regions. So, for example, by having a UL certified product, which is to be used in the system, may be accepted in various locations around the world, which accept the UL. With billions of products marked with the UL mark, we have to make sure we have a great surveillance team, which we have a market surveillance teams, which look, for example, for counterfeit products, right, or things that may not be legitimately under UL certification, which happens. So we have a strong brand protection and market surveillance that protects the brand and ensures that, especially when dealing with a life or safety product, it's something we don't want to enter the field that may not be necessarily the right product. That being said, as today's event, we work with global manufacturers and different stakeholders in the built environment, which helps us learn about the products. As Mustafa mentioned, new technologies are coming, new test methods are coming, so we have to adapt to this. The UL standards, for example, are published not only by UL but by a committee. So it's a group of individuals, manufacturers, other stakeholders in fire stopping that really help develop that standard and address all safety hazards for that. And lastly, I think UL is a very active member in different code and standard committees, alongside being part of working well with the local authorities, such as in the region of the civil defense. So I know UL is involved with ASTM standard committees, the UL standard committees, ISO, NFPA for hundreds of years. In Europe, CEN, EOTA, ASFP, just to name a few different organizations where UL learns and also shares information in regards to our expertise, and also learn from other individuals within those committees to, at the end of the day, create a very strong standard, for example, where we protect against fire to protect life and property.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very interesting. And same again for you, Muzaffar. Just to sign off our Q&A, what makes Fisher Middle East and Africa the specialist in the field? Why should people come to you in particular?
Yes, so I would like to quote our leader, Professor Klaus Fischer here. He said, and I quote, "Human life is more important than making money in business." Following this principle, we pride ourselves in offering cutting-edge engineering solutions with a prime focus on safety, right? Many a time people feel if the emphasis is on safety, the cost might be high. This is also a misunderstanding. Our Firestop solutions are effective and efficient, thereby reducing the overall cost in a given project. Now, Fisher Firestop systems comply with both European testing standards as well as the American testing standards. We have products that are tested to both these standards and are approved in all the GCC countries by the local civil defense. We walk the extra mile by providing timely technical service that is essential requirement for the Firestop applications, right? Fischer provides support in all the steps from the initial selection of the correct systems to the installation completion. We provide training and certification to the installers that would use our products. And lastly, we treat customers not just as customers that you come, buy a product and gone, finished. No, we treat them as partners with a focus on long-term relationships. That is what we say stands out for Fisher.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting to hear from our expert panelists today on fire stopping in the Middle East built environment. I personally feel that I've learned a lot from our conversation today. I hope that's the same case for our listeners. So yeah, thank you very much, Muzaffar and Jonathan. But as promised to our viewers when registering for this webinar today, we asked you to send over questions that you'd like to submit for our panelists. So we've got around just under 20 minutes left. So we've got time probably for a few questions. So one viewer has directed a question at Muzaffar and has asked, does Fischer provide third-party certifications for on-site Firestop? Muzaffar, are you able to answer the query here from our viewer?
Yes, Ashley. So if I understood the question right, I think the user intends to ask the question that whether we provide third-party certification for the installation that was done on site on Firestop. Well, the answer is no. Basically, if you look into the standards which guide on the on-site certification, we as manufacturer are not allowed to do on-site inspection, right? If you see the ASTM 2393, any of these codes, the manufacturer should not do the on-site inspection of fire stopping. That being said, we do not certify that, but we do offer to help the applicator by doing inspections when they call us on how it is progressing. So we can guide them and we can tell them on this site you have to apply this, and we go to the field, we go to the project sites, and we make sure that by visual inspection whether that application was correct or wrong. And many a times when you have a visual inspection, you come to know whether it is applied correctly or not just by the color of our sealants. So we have several sealants which are of different colors. So we are making those in different colors so that we know exactly what is to be used where, right? So that is how we are able to help with third parties with certifications for on-site installation. We can do that kind of inspection, but obviously, even as required by UEFA Life Safety Code, manufacturers are not supposed to issue a certification for the installation. And that makes sense because we are not there 24 hours when the application is done. We don't know what has been applied. So we can just do randomly, and we are not authorized to go and do a destructive testing on site. So that would be a specialized agency, maybe like a consultancy firm, third-party consultancy firm who would go on site and they would have a contract with the number of the destructive tests that would be required. So they will go cut the sealant, check the thicknesses and all of that. So we can guide that, but we cannot certify that. That's the answer to the question.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, Muzaffar. I hope that answers the question for our viewer there. And another person has asked, how do we know when Firestop systems should be installed? I presume that means installed within their project or something like that. Jonathan, perhaps you could take this up?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ashley. Again, as I mentioned several times, we want to go back to the UAE Life and Safety Code to understand when and where they're used. First off, so in summary, I think fire stops are intended to be used anywhere a service, if it's HVAC, plumbing, a door or a window penetrates a fire-rated wall and or floor assembly. So the wall and floor assembly may have fire rating. So when we interfere this or penetrate this a fire rated wall assembly, we want to ensure the same rating is maintained throughout that whole assembly. So when you start introducing your service lines, telecommunication, plumbing, cables, cable trays, you want to ensure that the whole system will still have the correct hourly rating. And then that hourly rating is dictated by the code, right? And then you all is there to just to test and certify, and eventually possibly inspect to ensure that they're installed to meet the current requirements, the local requirements, and also comply with any kind of, for example, NFPA requirements for installation and maintenance.
Okay. And one of our other registrants wants to find out a little bit more about some of the various technologies used in fire stopping from MEP services. I know we touched upon it quite briefly earlier on in the webinar, but Muzaffar, are you able to elaborate a little bit more about the sort of variations of technologies that Fischer uses?
Yes, Ashley. Actually, if I understood right, maybe they wanted to understand how the Firestop product works, basically. So in that case, the fire stopping industry and the fire stopping products is like a living animal, which is developing day in and day out, right? But if you see, if I could break it down, there are mainly four main technologies that are working behind these products. So to start with, let me talk about intumescent. Number one would be intumescent material. So intumescence is a property of a material or a firestop material that would allow it to expand when exposed to heat. Now it can expand multiple number of volumes, or it could expand just one or two volumes itself. So it could expand with a lot of pressure and it would expand with less pressure. So if you know what kind of product you're going to use, you can have a brief idea where you want to use it. So for example, if you talk about intumescent material with pressure, right, which expands much higher volume than what was initially there. So this would be predominantly used in services like plastic pipes, where you want the pipe to be crushed and closed, or it would leave a big opening where you want that complete opening to be closed down. So that is where intumescent material comes into play. Then we have another products which are basically ablative in nature. So what I mean by ablative is they are chemical compounds which have water bound within them, right? So when they are exposed to heat, the water is released as droplets, and this reduces the temperature at that interface, thereby preventing passage of heat and flames across its own body, right? So an ablative product could be like the Fischer coated panel system, right? Then we have products which work on the principle of insulative material. So insulative material is a property that when a material is present and there is a fire on one side, it wouldn't allow the heat to pass through it. It just provides insulation, just like your sweater or something like that. So we have the mortar, which would just be there. It would prevent the flame and heat to pass through it. So this is called as insulative property of a material. And finally, we have something called as charring or carbonization. So what it means is basically when a material which is having this charring property is exposed to fire, it generates a kind of a layer or a char on top of its body. So this char is in the end again insulative, so it wouldn't prevent the heat and flames to pass through it. So for example, our FIAM sealant, so if you burn that sealant, it would become black. That was the char. And then you would see that char is preventing the passage of flame and heat through the body of itself. Now, many a times I get this question that what is the reaction to fire for your products? So many a times people think that since it's a Firestop product, it should not burn, right? Like concrete. So concrete does not burn. Same thing for Firestop. They are assuming that since it is used in fire prevention, it should not burn. But this is again a misunderstanding, because the Firestop materials, some of them are designed to burn and then activate. So, for example, our intumescent wrap, if it does not burn, then it would not expand. So it has to burn to expand. Similarly, the charring that I talked about, it has to burn, create the char layer, and then prevent the passage of flame and heat through its body. And I hope that would answer the question.
I liked part of your answer there where you used a comparison to a sweater. That's quite a good way to describe it, actually. That's kind of one of the things that stuck with me on that. So I hope our listener or viewer got enough information out of that. So we've just got probably time for one more question, which is again linked with technology. It's obviously a very big topic at the minute, and it's something that lots of our viewers seem to want to know about. So I'm going to direct this question to Jonathan. So how does UAL ensure the Firestop technology products are working kind of successfully and efficiently?
Sure, it's a great question, Ashley. As Mustafa mentioned, I mean, things are changing. New ways of manufacturing, the composition of materials, the purpose of the Firestop, what's intended to perform during a fire varies. Either it's intimessing or charring. So we want to ensure that when technology changes, and specifically in these Firestop materials and systems, is that it can still perform and achieve the correct requirements outlined in each individual's test standard, right? So, for example, as Mustafa mentioned, the product is supposed to intermest, close the system down. We want to ensure that because it closes the system down, it doesn't affect the temperature on the unexposed sides, or there's concerns of flaming. And he described different products, a different composition of that Firestop changing. And for our responsibility as ULs, you want to ensure that as these things change, and we know they will, they're going to create more safety hazards, right? They're going to create different concerns that may affect the results of a fire test and a host stream test per UL, for example. So we want to ensure as these continue to change, that we look at it again, either through a fire test, through a large scale test, a small scale test, some bench test, to identify that the chemistry composition does not adversely affect the end result of that Firestop system, which is how we adapt to it. We're not necessarily in manufacturing any products, but because we're committed and involved with different organizations, different committees, code developments, work with manufacturers, we understand that the change is coming, so we try to adapt those changes within the standards to address any concerns. As I mentioned earlier, the movement, for example, was recently introduced to Firestop, ACM E3037. There's always concern about what happens when a Firestop system moves over time, right, in a building, either by seismic movement or vibration in the building. How does the adhesion from that penetrant or that substrate affect the Firestop system? So these are just one recent performance of a Firestop that you all start looking at, the committees, ACM start looking at, the industry is concerned about it. So we want to ensure that the correct standard is taken into account and the correct measures are taken to ensure the correct fire properties. And it's also important, one last comment, is to ensure that you use the correct safety standard when it comes to fire. There are many times where products are tested to, it could be fire rated, fire retardant, but is it tested to a Firestop standard? Is it tested to the correct test method with the correct results? So not to get confused with other fire tests, which are smaller bench tests to get a characteristic of a material, and it could be said that it's fire rated, fire retardant. You have to ensure that the correct system test accompanies that Firestop product at the end of the day.
Okay. I think it's really interesting at the moment, sort of the acceleration of technology, particularly within the construction industry in the Middle East. And obviously with things going on in the minute, obviously with COVID happening, people are now looking to, the digitalization seems to be shifting a lot quicker. Mustafa, just to close kind of our Q&A here, what do you think is the outlook for Firestop systems, particularly with technology? Do you have any sort of thoughts about it? And do you think it's going to be the future at all for like Fischer and obviously how you operate in the future?
Yes, yes. As you see, Ashley, as rightly pointed out by Jonathan, there is a lot of developments that are happening currently, and everybody has now woken up to the fact that passive fire protection as a strategy is very, very important in a given building, right? And this is very well noted by all the local civil defense agencies in the region itself. So we see that the Fire Life Safety Code of UAE was developed from 2012 to 2018, and then we should be expecting something soon also, that there might be again improvement and more addition and more emphasis on the passive fire protection side and fire stops in particular. So be it the MEP penetrations, or be it the joint applications, or be it the curtain wall or facade applications, Firestop is going to become is already very important. It would become more and more emphasized and more required and more what we call it as guided or standardized. So You cannot say that, okay, I will not use Firestop in a particular building and risk the whole occupants of that building. If you be a developer or you be a owner of a building, you need to consider this kind of facts, that tomorrow maybe we also stay there. We need to have this Firestop in place to help ensure that we have done the maximum that we could to fight against this ever living threat of fire in a given building. So that is what I would like to add onto this.
Great, yeah, thank you. And that is all we have time for. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that tuned in to our webinar today, and particularly to our two panelists, Muzaffar and Jonathan. Do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make? Jonathan, we'll start with you first.
Sure, thank you, Ashley. And again, I'd like to thank yourself, Ashley, and Mustafa today for the webinar. I think it's really important. Also like to thank the listeners who took time out of the day to listen today to feel it's an important topic. As you heard today, there's a lot of things changing, a lot of concerns with the fire concerns in this region specifically, and it's always nice to hear from the manufacturer side what's going on in the field. As I just learned today, things are constantly changing, even with in the company like Fisher and Mustafa, that technology is changing. There's cost savings that's going to happen, change in formulation, materials. So it's good that we learn about this and we share our knowledge, and hopefully we can discuss other various topics in the future. And I think we all share the same goal at the end of the day, is to obviously protect life, number one, and protect property, and continue to learn and engage and take good feedback from the industry.
Absolutely. And Muzaffar?
Yes, Ashley. First of all, I would like to thank Construction Week for conducting such kind of awareness programs, and I would like to thank UL to take part along with us in this kind of session where we have talked about a very important topic of fire stopping in terms of fire protection strategies. And I think we should be considering doing more of these kind of awareness programs, and that would help understand more about passive fire protection in particular for the public, that is for your subscribers, basically. And this is what I would like to close with, by thanking all the participants who had joined us today. They have joined us from several parts of the world, and it was a pleasure being here. Thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you again.
Absolute pleasure speaking to you both. For any further product or service inquiries, then please email marketing@fischer.e to get in touch with the Fisher Middle East and Africa team, and ul.mina@ul.com for the Underwriters Laboratories team. So to keep up to date with all our news and developments across the Middle East construction industry, then go to our online website, constructionweekonline.com, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very, very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.